Hello. I've spoken to you so far about one principle from behavioural science, social proof. But I want to talk to you about one other idea that really relates to the blueprint for brand growth. One of the ideas from that piece of work is that we need to be more consistent as marketers. And that certainly resonates from a behavioural science angle. One of the greats of 20th century psychology was a man called Robert Zionch, who spent most of his career at the University of Michigan. And I want to talk about his most famous study that was done back in 1968 that supports the need for consistency. For this experiment, Zionch recruited a group of participants and he showed them either nonsense words or Chinese characters. And these were Americans. Crucially, they did not speak Chinese. He gave them a book, and on each page there was a nonsense word or a Chinese character. And people flicked through the books for about 5 minutes, and then he questions the participants as to what they thought those words or characters might mean. The interesting twist in the experiment was that when people had gone through the book, sometimes the character or nonsense word was shown once, sometimes twice, sometimes 5 times, sometimes 10 times, all the way up to a maximum of 25 repetitions. And Zionch found an interesting pattern. When he asked people to say what they thought the word meant, he found that the more often people had seen a character, the more likely they were to think that the word had a positive, a good meaning. He called this idea the mere exposure effect. And it's the idea that repetition alone, so not people getting additional information, but repetition alone makes us find stimulus more appealing. So, in his words, familiarity breeds contentment, not contempt. This wasn't a one off study. Zionch repeated it with human faces. And again, the more often people saw a photo of a particular face, the more beautiful they thought that face was. Zionch even replicated this study amongst animals. It is a deep-seated finding that we find the familiar more appealing. And there's probably an evolutionary angle. After all, for most of our evolutionary history, we feared the new because the new could be dangerous. So Zionch argued if we repeatedly saw a stimulus and it didn't do us harm, then that stimulus would become more appealing. The idea of the mere exposure effect is deeply important in marketing because it suggests that we should prioritize consistency. We need people to become familiar and have repeated exposure to our ideas and what our brand stands for. And unfortunately, many marketers ignore that. Mark Ritson famously said marketers are like magpies. They jump around from one piece of copy to another. They change the brand messaging far too often. And I think we're guilty of doing that because our experience as a marketer is wildly different from our consumers. Now, think about what it must be like to be the brand manager of fine toilet tissue. Well, they will think about their ads for 40 hours a week. But how long does the consumer think about those ads or those products? 4 seconds a week, 40 seconds a week? It's completely different to the marketer by orders of magnitude. So when we're bored of our ad and our particular angle, it's barely starting to register with the consumer. So there are two key points here. Firstly, think about wear out. The argument from the mere exposure effect is the idea of wear out is massively exaggerated. Think about, can you run your copy for longer? You could take the savings that you would otherwise be putting into creative, put that money into extra media weight. So don't assume your copy's worn out. It often takes much, much longer than we expect. And then the second point is if you're ever thinking about your brand approach, your overall campaign, I would sound a note of caution because the mere exposure effect suggests that actually it takes time for us to warm to an idea. So if you move away, you lose some of that benefit of repetition, and actually you could put the brand back. So that's our second principle from behavioural science, the mere exposure effect. And it's the argument that with consistency, with repeated exposure, even if we tell someone nothing new about our brand, people will become more predisposed to it. Thank you.